Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. JustusRStone here, talking about Volume 5 of Pandora Hearts. Now, this is my ongoing discussion series where I basically spoil the entire volume, sort of saying what I think and what I think might happen based on what I've read. So if you haven't read Volume 5, don't watch this video. It is full of spoilers. If you've read Volume 5 or you just don't care, then hey, welcome aboard. So in Volume 5, we continue with Oz and Gil and Alice and Break being stuck in the Cheshire Cat's dimension. Now, some pretty crazy things happen here, and we get this really big reveal. So Oz goes in search of Alice, which is sort of where we left off in Volume 4, that he was going to go searching for her. And as he does so, he encounters a child that looks very much like Vincent, which is Gil's brother. And he finds himself in this city where everyone has been slaughtered, and Vincent is, well, he's pretty much totally nuts. Like, he is completely disassociative of everything that's going on. He sees the people as dolls. He says, I'm not the one, this isn't my responsibility, or I'm not responsible for this. I can't remember the exact words, but basically he's like, this isn't my fault. Like, I had nothing to do with this. And he's not saying it to Oz, it's like he's just trying to say it to himself. Which, I mean, having kids, I can tell you that when kids do that kind of stuff, most of the time it means that it is their fault, and somehow they're just trying to convince themselves that it's not, particularly if they think that a parent's going to ask them about it. So, somehow, and, you know, really big spoiler, tying into the end of this volume, I think it's very obvious that Vincent had at least something to do with this. We find out that this is where the big sort of disaster happened 100 years ago, and where this entire city was dragged down into the abyss. And so everybody apparently was completely slaughtered before this happened. And later in the volume we find out that this is probably like a blood sacrifice, that these people were intentionally murdered by the Baskervilles in order to, like, we don't really have that answer yet. Why? It obviously has to do with the abyss. It obviously has to do with sort of the intention of the abyss and earning its favor. And we know that the 4 doors that lead into the abyss that the dukedoms have, this came about after this whole disaster. So anyhow, Oz sort of clues into this fact that he's like, wait, if Vincent is here and these are the events of 100 years ago, if this is like Alice's memories of 100 years ago, then that means that Vincent and probably Gil were here. And he says, like, how is that even possible? And then he says, oh, right, like, I'm like that too. And the second he said that, I thought for sure that it was going to be like this switch in his head where he was like, I'm from 100 years ago, or, you know, somehow tie into the whole Jack and everything else. But no, he's like, oh, yeah, I was gone for 10 years. And I was like, oh, yeah, all right, fair enough, fair enough. But so he reasons that, you know, if I could fall into the abyss and it felt like nothing, and it was like 10 years, then it's completely possible that if somehow Vincent and Gil fell into the abyss during this whole disaster, that it is possible that over 100 years could pass before they escaped, even though it may seem like there wasn't a lot of passing of time to them. So we have this whole thing of now Vincent and Gil's like backstory is so much bigger now, in my mind at least, to what it was before. So we have, not only is Vincent kind of this evil bastard in general, but now we have this sort of thing tying him to the Baskervilles, which is this family that supposedly has caused all of this. They were the ones who tossed Oz into the abyss in the very beginning. They're supposedly the ones that caused the disaster 100 years before. So we have this big reveal about Vincent and about Gil and potentially their backstory. And then Oz, when he finally finds Alice, like, this part I was a little iffy on, because I was like, is this somehow Oz himself? Is this somehow Oz's connection to the abyss? Is this his connection to Jack somehow? But he has like this moment where he is essentially going completely crazy, and he's like, I'm going to do anything for Alice. I'll do anything for her. And when she's like, I'm afraid of myself, when she confesses this, he's like, then I'll erase you. I'll get rid of you, because that way you won't have to be afraid anymore. And of course, we, the reader, realize just how nuts this is, and thankfully Gil shows up and kind of gives him a good old bitch slapping across the face and brings him back to his senses. Now, Oz and Alice escape from the Cheshire Cat's dimension as it falls apart. They land in the middle of Pandora, setting off a huge pandemonium. And when Break escapes from the abyss with Gil separately, he realizes that the only reason this would have been done was so that they could be a distraction. And he finds Vincent, and we find out now that Sharon is not dead, which is good, because I kind of like her, and I didn't want her to be dead, especially this early in the series. But so we find out that Vincent basically just kidnapped her to use as a pawn so that he could get whatever information Break has about this sort of disaster 100 years ago. So he steals the item that holds Alice's memory from Break in exchange for Sharon. Now, I kind of thought this was a little... like, it was a little too easy. I mean, I know Break had kind of gotten a little beaten up and stuff in the abyss, and maybe he's not as strong at this point, but I kind of thought that it was a little... he gave it up a little too easy, especially for Break, who seems to always have sort of a backup plan and everything else. It was just... it seemed a little too easy, but I guess at the same time it speaks for his affection for Sharon. Now, big thing then happens, of course, as Oz and Alice in the form of B-Rabbit are being chased through Pandora by the guards and by the dukes and everything else. He becomes, Oz it is, becomes possessed by Jack, by the spirit of Jack Vasilius. And this sort of really speaks to what I suspected in my last video, where I said I thought that Oz was somehow a fragment of Jack. And we don't really get that definitively. It speaks more like almost an idea of reincarnation is what one person mentions. They sort of talk about it being reincarnation, but I think it's something more. I still think it's something more than that. That just seems way too easy an answer, especially for a series that so far has been pretty complicated. And it's only the 5th volume, and this thing goes on for like another 19 volumes after this. Like, I can't even imagine how crazy it gets from this point. So I think that Oz, obviously we find out, okay, so everybody, he becomes Jack. Jack inhabits him and is kind of like, dudes, this kid is like the fulfillment of your prophecies, blah, 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 blah. Like, even Gil stabbing Oz during that whole thing when Gil was possessed is like part of this prophecy. He's like, your whole duty right now is to protect Oz because the head of the Baskervilles is back, and he is going to stop at nothing to destroy you all and get the doors to the abyss and seek the favor of the intention of the abyss, and then God only knows what he'll be capable of. And so everybody questions this, but here's the thing that I was thinking, and there's an image earlier on of the Baskervilles when, I can't remember at what point it is, I should go through and put the image up, but anyway, there's this image of the Baskervilles. Well, we saw them in the last book. So we have this image of the Baskervilles, and then there's an image of the Baskervilles when Jack is talking about them, that, you know, they destroyed the city. And they all look the same. Like, they're all the same characters that we have seen as the Baskervilles in the modern era in the previous book. So it seems, and here's my thing, it seems that they came through whatever way that Vincent and Gil escaped. It seems that so did the Baskervilles. I think that they were sucked into the abyss the same way as Vincent and Gilbert were, and I think that they escaped. And everybody sort of says how, oh, the Baskervilles became sort of legend, they've been quiet for 100 years. I don't think that was something they did intentionally. I think, and again, this is all me just theorizing based on what we've seen, but I think that the Baskervilles disappeared along with Vincent and Gilbert and didn't return until either around the same time they did, which then they would have spent some time sort of putting things together and figuring out what's going on in the world, or they came out at a later point and sort of figured out what was going on. I'm not too sure at this point, because the whole thing with Oz's, like, coming of age ceremony, obviously they would have had to know that was happening. They would have had to have known that there was sort of this thing going on with Oz, and so that there had to have been some planning there. So I'm thinking they came out ahead of time, but I still think that the majority of that 100 years, the Baskervilles have been trapped in the abyss, the same as Vincent and Gilbert. And I'm guessing that's one thing we're going to figure out later on, is how they actually escaped and didn't get killed while they were in the abyss. Because let's face it, Oz was there for not too long, and man, like, he almost got axed if it weren't for Alice. Which brings me to sort of the last thing that maybe I will mention in this video, because I don't, it's long. Wow, my videos are long. But the one thing that I want to mention is Alice is dead. So Oz sees Alice murdered, and we're not sure who did it. We see like this pair of scissors, and she's got the big gash and everything else. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Vincent, because that kid is crazy. But we see Alice and we realize that her human form was murdered at the same time that this whole thing occurred. So how did this happen? Like, how did she break up her memories? How did she become a chain, as well as my theory that she is the intention of the abyss? But like, how did she separate herself if she was murdered, like, during all of this stuff happening? Like, did she somehow know ahead of time? Did she somehow take care of it ahead of time? Or was she somehow brought into the abyss, and then it was the abyss itself that separated all of these parts into various places? I'm not too sure. The Cheshire Cat, while he was fighting with Oz and the rest of them, was screaming out for Alice, even though he said that he hated the Alice and wanted to kill the Alice that came with Oz and, like, is the chain B-Rabbit. So it suggests to me that, again, this is reinforcing my theory that the intention of the abyss is somehow a form of Alice. It's just, how did these other forms get created, especially if she was murdered on the same night that this whole disaster happened? So lots to talk about, lots to look forward to in volume number 6. I'm really glad I already own it, so I can, once I've done this video and posted it, I can get down to reading that one. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Leave your comments down below, especially if you've read the volume, some of the things that you want to think about. I probably haven't discussed everything that's in this book. Like I said, there's so much stuff happening right now in these, and I mean, this is only the 5th volume. So subscribe to the channel, click on those links. You can keep up with all my future Pandora Hearts reviews. I do a volume every other week. I will be back on Saturday with a review of The Irregular from Magic High School. That's a light novel review. And then next week, next Wednesday, will be a new manga, volume number 1. And the week after that, I'll be back with another Pandora Hearts video. So again, thanks very much for watching, everybody. I hope to see you in my next one. Until then, bye-bye for now.